He saved the alien girl, and she saved his heart. The stars burned cold and distant through the viewport of the mining station as Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead and stared at another broken drill bit with frustration building in his chest like pressure in an airlock about to blow. And he had been working on this godforsaken rock for 3 years now, extracting rare minerals from asteroids that most people back on Earth would never even know existed. And the loneliness had become a constant companion like the hum of the life support systems that kept him breathing in the vacuum of space. The alarm shattered his thoughts with a piercing wail that sent his heart racing, and Jake stumbled toward the control panel, where red lights flashed across the screen indicating an object approaching fast. And whatever it was had just entered the detection range of the station's sensors, and he pulled up the tracking data with shaking fingers because nothing ever approached. This station and supplies only came once every 2 months, and that shipment was not due for another 3 weeks. The object was small and moving erratically like a wounded bird trying to stay airborne, and Jake enhanced the image until he could see it was some kind of escape pod. But the design was nothing he recognized, with curves and symbols that looked organic rather than manufactured, and his mind raced through possibilities because humanity had never made contact with alien life. And if this was what he thought it was, then everything was about to change. He suited up faster than he ever had before and cycled through the airlock with his magnetic boots clanging against the metal exterior of the station as he made his way toward the pod that had come to rest against the docking clamp. And up close it was even stranger, with a surface that seemed to shift colors in the starlight like oil on water, and there was a window or viewport of some kind. And when Jake pressed his helmet against it to look inside, his breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful in a way that made his human mind struggle to process what he was seeing, because her skin had a faint luminescence like moonlight on water, and her hair floated around her head in shades of silver and blue. Even though there should be no gravity in the pod, and her eyes were closed, but he could see she was breathing, and there was a wound on her side leaking something that glowed faintly. Green. Jake did not think about protocols or regulations or the fact that he had no idea what opening this pod might do, because all he could see was someone who needed help, and he found the emergency release mechanism after several minutes of searching, and the pod opened with a hiss of escaping atmosphere, and he caught her before she could float away into the void and carried her back to the station, with his heart pounding so hard he could hear it echoing in his helmet. Inside the medical bay, he laid her on the examination table and removed his suit with trembling hands, and now that he could see her without the helmet between them, he realized she was even more extraordinary than he first thought, because her features were humanoid but refined, in ways that seemed almost impossible with high cheekbones and a delicate bone structure, and her skin up close had tiny patterns like scales or fractals that caught the light. The wound on her side was deep, and Jake grabbed the medical kit even, though he had no idea if human medicine would work on her biology, and he cleaned the injury as gently as he could and applied synthetic skin and antibiotics and pain medication, and all the while he kept talking to her in a soft voice, telling her that she was safe now and that he would take care of her, and hoping that somehow she could hear him, even though she remained unconscious. 3 days passed before her eyes finally opened, and Jake had barely left her side sleeping in a chair next to the medical bed. And when those eyes focused on him, they were the color of amethyst with depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. And she tried to sit up but gasped in pain, and he gently pushed her back down and brought her water, which she accepted with a grateful nod, and he realized that despite being from different worlds, they could understand basic gestures. Her name was Lyra, and she communicated this by pointing to herself and making a sound that he tried to repeat, and she smiled for the first time when he got it approximately right. And over the following days they developed a way to talk, using drawings and gestures and the station's computer, which tried to analyze her language, and slowly, they built a bridge between their worlds. She told him through pictures and pantomime that she had been fleeing from something, and Jake saw fear flash across her face when she drew ships with angular designs hunting her pod, and she had been a scientist on her world studying ancient technologies when she discovered something she was not supposed to know, and they had tried to silence her, and she escaped with knowledge that could change the balance of power in her part of the galaxy. Jake found himself drawn to her in ways he had never experienced with anyone back home, And it was not just her alien beauty, but the way she looked at everything with curiosity and wonder, and how she laughed when he tried to explain human customs, and how her hand felt when it brushed against his, sending warmth through his entire body, and he realized he was falling for someone who was not even human, and the impossibility of it made his chest ache. Lyra taught him about her people who called themselves the Valara, and they had traveled the stars for thousands of years and built civilizations across dozens of worlds, and they valued knowledge above all else. But their government had become corrupt and hungry for power, and she showed him the data crystal she had smuggled out, containing evidence of weapons that could destroy planets and plans to use them against worlds that refused to submit. She was teaching him words in her language when the proximity alarm went off again, and Jake felt ice flood his veins because 2 ships were approaching, and their signatures matched the ones Lyra had drawn as her pursuers. And they had found her, somehow tracked the pod across light years, and now they were here, and Jake had maybe 20 minutes before they arrived. He grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her toward the storage bay where his personal shuttle sat covered in dust because he rarely used it, and they had to run, and she was still weak from her injuries, but fear gave her strength, and Jake fired up the engines while she strapped herself into the co-pilot seat, and her eyes were wide with terror and trust in equal measure. The mining station exploded behind them as they cleared the docking bay, and Jake pushed the throttle to maximum, while alarms screamed about structural integrity and fuel consumption, and the alien ships were faster and gaining on them, and weapons fire streaked past the shuttle painting. The darkness with deadly light, and Lyra was doing something with the ship's computer, her fingers flying over controls she should not have understood, but somehow did. She turned to him and spoke in broken English that she had been learning and said they must jump. But Jake knew this shuttle did not have faster than light capability, and she shook her head and pressed something into his hand, and it was the data crystal. And she told him to trust her, and pressed buttons on the console in a sequence that should not have worked, and suddenly space twisted around them. They came out of the jump near a planet Jake did not recognize with 2 suns and rings of ice, and Lyra slumped in her seat exhausted from whatever she had just done, and the alien ships had not followed, and they were safe for now. And Jake set course for the planet because they needed supplies and time to figure out what came next. The surface was cold but breathable, and they found a cave system to hide in, and built a fire from local vegetation, and sat close together for warmth, and Lyra leaned her head on Jake's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, and she told him in halting English that she had modified his shuttle using principles from the data she carried, and that was why they escaped. Days became weeks in their cave sanctuary, and Jake hunted for food, while Lyra worked to repair the shuttle and build a transmitter to contact her allies. And they fell into a rhythm that felt domestic and right, and at night they talked for hours about their different worlds and dreams, and Jake told her about Earth, and she told him about Valara and the purple skies and singing forests of her home. One night as the twin suns set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lyra turned to Jake and took his face in. Her hands and her touch was gentle and warm, and she kissed him, and it was strange and wonderful and perfect all at once. And when they pulled apart, she said in careful English that she loved him, and Jake felt his heart swell because he loved her, too, this alien woman who had crashed into his life and changed everything. The transmitter finally picked up a response, and Lyra's people were coming, but so were her enemies, and Jake and Lyra had to make a choice, and she wanted him to come with her to fight against the corruption in her government and help her people be free. And Jake looked at this extraordinary woman who had become his whole world and knew there was only one answer he could give. When the ships arrived, there was a battle in the skies above the planet, and Lyra's allies fought against the corrupt forces, and Jake piloted the shuttle with skills he did not know he had, while Lyra coordinated the attack from the co-pilot seat, and they worked together like they had been partners for years instead of weeks. And when the battle ended, the corrupt ships retreated, and Lyra's people had won this fight, if not the war, standing on the bridge of the allied ship with Lyra beside him and her hand in his. Jake looked out a